The report that Dr. Birx referenced, the British report, basically said that we would have to keep these measures in place until there's a vaccine for coronavirus. As we know, Dr. Fauci and others have said that could be a year to 18 months. That doesn't mean this is going to last this way. We're going to live that way for that long. But that was part of what I think opened the president's eyes yesterday.
Well, there's a very sobering report that was delivered this weekend. 2 million, up to 2 million Americans could die from the coronavirus. That's actually, think about it, Willie, that's more Americans than died in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and the Civil War combined. So it's a staggering number. The same thing happened in Great Britain, where they reversed course after finding out their models yesterday would lead to 250,000 British citizens dying. So there was, without a doubt, there was an awakening in there. And the White House is unusually focused and frightened about what is coming. I say frightened. They understand what's going to be coming. I spoke to several high-ranking officials yesterday, John Meacham, who said this is going to be very bad. We are going to have to, it's all hands on deck. This isn't like 9/11. This is like World War II. It's going to change the way we live as Americans. And the atmosphere inside the White House was very sober. But, John, as I heard the president yesterday talking about voluntary measures and then suggesting they may have to lock down so-called hot spots, I was thinking that's actually the best way to go at first, because we Americans might not respond as well, certainly not as well as, let's say, people in China, people in Singapore, to federal government locking things down. That it's going region by region, state by state, locality by locality. Might that be a better way to start this?
Well, the policy is obviously evolving rapidly, and I think it's going to get more draconian before it gets less so, unquestionably. I think what Dr. Fauci's been saying about overreact and then be criticized for that makes inherent good sense. The analogy I keep thinking of is less about America during World War II, because though we mobilized, we did it very late. Obviously, after Pearl Harbor and Germany declared war on us, 16 million Americans served, about 11% of the male population, 2 million in Europe. And there were victory gardens and there was a full mobilization. I think this is more like England and Britain during World War II, because civilians are actually combatants, if you will, if you follow the analogy. Everybody was at the front, right? And Churchill said in the great Finest Hour speech, let us so conduct ourselves that if the British Empire were to last 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour. He needed everybody because Germany was dropping bombs on everybody. And where we're living right now is the Luftwaffe is overhead in the form of a pandemic. And so it requires, dare I say it, Churchill-like leadership. And yes, yesterday was marginally better, but anyone, it's like Lucy in the football with the federal government of the last 3 years. Whenever you think things are moving in the right direction, they end up not. So, and that's not a political partisan point. It's just an observation about the nature of public leadership. The other Churchill line that I think is really important here is he once said, there's no worse mistake in public leadership than to hold out false hopes soon to be swept away. And so, to go directly to your question, I think you go hard at this and clean it up later. If you go soft and you have even more people dying, that's irreversible.
Well, and I think, Tom, that's actually after 3-4 weeks of the White House being in denial, talking about this going away magically. I think that's the realization that finally landed hard on the White House yesterday, that there's not going to be a happy ending to this. You're trying to mitigate. You're trying to manage this and keep the death count as low as possible. What we saw yesterday was White House finally focused on what they need to be focused on. I'm curious what your thoughts are about moving forward. Do we need from the White House to have a declaration that the entire country's locked down like they're doing in France and Spain? Or is this a good first step? Is this a good trial balloon to get people prepared? Because we've gone from emergency declaration to now the president, the White House saying 10 or fewer people together, work at home, self-isolate in a dramatic way. Are we just going step by step to the point where the country gets locked down like France and Spain?
Well, I think, first of all, I agree with John that we have to be careful about a Lucy in the football situation here. You know, one press conference where the president meets kind of the minimum requirements of sobriety and clarity is not a sea change. It's something to be happy about. It's something to applaud. But I think, you know, the president has trouble focusing, and I think that's true for this administration in general. I think most Americans would probably be happy if Tony Fauci became president right about now. I don't think it's going to be a good move to try to go for a national lockdown. And I don't say this because I'm not a medical doctor. Looking at this as a matter of policy, I think the problem is that this president has lost the benefit of the doubt with a lot of people. And so things like very draconian measures that look like curtailments of freedom, especially during an election season, are going to get a jaundiced eye from a lot of Americans. And that's unfortunate. I don't say that because I somehow think the president would be up to no good doing that, or the team around him, or the doctors advising him, but rather because of the president's track record, not just for 3 years, but especially in the past 3 months, where he has been really inconstant and lacked transparency and put out a lot of bad information. If the president and the White House tries to move forward now with these really draconian solutions, I think you're going to have people second-guessing him because, again, he's lost the benefit of the doubt among a lot of Americans. I think what they're doing is they're trying to edge us toward more tougher solutions incrementally so that we can accept it more easily.
Yeah, which I think is actually the proper approach. And again, I will associate myself with everything that's been said about how this president, this White House, has bungled this crisis over the past. And of course, if you've watched the show for more than 10 minutes over the past 3.5 years, you understand we're critical of just about everything the president does. But Mika, as John Meacham said, I'm going to pull out John's World War II analogy, and us being in a position that Britain was. We are all joined together as a country fighting an epidemic that could end up, let me say this again, based on a study that got to the White House yesterday, kill more people, kill more Americans than died in World War I, World War II, the Civil War, and Vietnam. We all have to work together. I am hopeful that the White House and that the president continues this somber approach, because, you know, at the beginning of this administration, when we had a lot of leaders like, well, your father, Robert Gates, others all said, we only have one president at a time. We have to do everything we can do to make sure this president succeeds. Well, obviously, this president has made that very difficult over the past 3 years. I'm hopeful that yesterday was a new beginning, especially as it pertains to this battle that we're all facing. And one final thought. And you know what? We can sit here and say whatever the hell we want to say on TV. There's 45% of Americans that aren't going to believe this is a crisis until Donald Trump says it's a crisis. We had the South Carolina governor saying he was going to go to the going to go to the St. Patrick's Day parade, and people should just stay at home, until the president declared a national emergency. There are other people being irresponsible on cable news until the president said this was a serious challenge. We need buy-in from all Americans to win this battle against a pandemic that will end up killing at least 100,000 Americans